Welcome to the Health Headliner podcast by Tudu Digital. Our content is informational only and not medical advice. Please consult your provider. Now, let's dive into today's headlines.
Okay, let's dive into something, well, pretty much universal.
Right.
Teenagers and sleep,
Hmm.
or maybe the lack of it.
Right. We all know the stereotype, don't we? The late nights, the phones glowing, the struggle to get them out of bed.
Exactly. It just feels like, part of the deal with teenagers.
Yeah.
But what if it's more than just making them tired?
What if those hours they're missing night after night are actually changing the physical wiring in their brains as they develop?
And even more, could those specific brain changes, those wiring patterns, actually help predict behavior problems down the line? Like a year later.
That's the really fascinating question, isn't it? And it's exactly what some new research is looking into. So today we're doing a deep dive into this link.
The link between sleep habits in early adolescence and these brain connectivity patterns.
Yeah, and how those specific patterns might forecast, future behavioral challenges. It's pretty compelling stuff.
So for this deep dive, we're looking at a recent health news article, but also, crucially, we're going right to the source.
Mm-hmm. The scientific paper itself. It was published in the journal Brain and Behavior. We want to really understand the details.
Our mission, then, is to unpack all of this.
Yeah.
What is brain connectivity, really? How does sleep, both how long and how well kids sleep, fit in?
And what are the potential sort of implications for adolescent well-being, for mental health? We're letting the data guide us.
Okay, sounds good. Before we get into the study itself, maybe we need a quick refresher on the teenage brain. Because it's not static, right?
Absolutely not. Adolescence is this period of massive brain reorganization. It's incredibly dynamic. Think major construction zone.
Right. Lots of changes happening.
Definitely. And one really important network the study focuses on is the default mode network.
Okay, default mode network. What does that do?
So it's not just one spot. It's a big network spread across the brain. And it's most active when you're not focused on the outside world. Like when you're mind wandering, reflecting on yourself, thinking about others, remembering things.
Kind of your internal monologue system.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Your internal narrative, your self-processing hub.
But we're not always stuck inside our heads. We need to pay attention to stuff.
Exactly. And that's where the other networks come in. The study looked at how this default mode network connects with networks involved in, attention and focus.
Like what kind of networks?
Well, things like the frontoparietal network that's key for complex tasks, self-control. Then there's the salience network, which helps decide what's important enough to grab our attention.
Okay.
And also the dorsal attention network, which is really crucial for that focused, goal-directed attention, like concentrating on homework or a task. These are the networks that pull you out of that internal world.
So internal default mode network, external attention networks.
Yeah.
And the study is about connectivity between them. What does that mean physically?
Connectivity here is really about communication. How well do different brain regions or these whole networks sync up their activity? Think of them like cities. Within network connectivity is like the road system inside the default mode network city. How smoothly do those internal thoughts flow?
Right.
And between network connectivity is like the highways connecting the default mode city to the attention cities. How strong are those communication lines?
So stronger connections mean more efficient communication, generally.
Generally, yeah. More synchronized activity between those areas. The study looked at both within the default mode network and between it and the others.
Got it. So they're mapping these connections during this really key developmental time. How did they actually do this study? Where did the data come from?
It came from a huge project, the Adolescent Brain and Cognitive Development Study. It's the biggest long-term study of its kind in the U.S., following thousands of kids.
Wow. How many kids were in this specific part of the research?
This analysis used data from over 2,800 adolescents, and their average age when the main data was collected was about 12 years old, so right at the start of adolescence.
And measuring sleep. Like you mentioned, it's tough if you just ask teenagers.
Right. They might not remember accurately or,
Yeah. So how did this study get around that?
This is a real plus. They used Fitbit devices. The kids wore them for about 2 weeks.
Oh, okay. Objective data.
Exactly. It gave them objective measures of sleep duration, how long they actually slept, and sleep efficiency.
Efficiency being how much of the time in bed they were actually asleep.
Precisely. Not just lying there awake. Getting that real-world objective sleep data is so valuable.
Okay, Fitbits for sleep and the brain wiring. How did they see that?
That was done using magnetic resonance imaging MRI scans. specifically resting state functional MRI.
So they scan the kids while they're just resting.
Yep, just lying quietly in the scanner, not doing any particular task. By looking at the natural fluctuations in brain activity, researchers can see which areas tend to sync up. That reveals the connectivity patterns.
Like seeing which parts of the brain hum together when it's idling.
That's a good way to think about it.
Okay, so objective sleep, detailed brain scans, and they needed to link this to behavior. How was that measured?
That information came from parents or primary caregivers. They filled out questionnaires about the kids' behavior at 2 points. Around year 2 of the main study, which is when the sleep and MRI data were collected, and then again a year later, in year 3.
And what kind of behaviors?
They looked at 2 broad types: internalizing problems, things like anxiety, depression, withdrawal, and externalizing problems, acting out, aggression, poor impulse control.
So sleep and brain patterns at age 12, and then behavior problems like acting out a year later, that's the setup.
Exactly.
But with all that complex brain scan data, how do they find actual patterns? It sounds like information overload.
Yeah, it is a ton of data. They use a statistical method called latent profile analysis.
Latent profile analysis, what's that?
Think of it like asking a computer to sift through all those brain connectivity maps and see if there are natural groups, distinct profiles of how kids' brains are wired.
So instead of just averages, it looks for recurring types of brain wiring.
Precisely. Based on the connections within the default mode network and between it and the attention networks.
Interesting. So what types or profiles did they find?
They found 4 main ones. The biggest group was called moderate. Pretty average connectivity levels all around, within and between networks.
Okay, the baseline, maybe?
Kind of. Then there was a really interesting one, low within and high between. These kids had weaker connections inside their default mode network.
Less internal chatter.
Sort of, but stronger connections between their default mode network and those external attention networks, especially the dorsal attention network for focus tasks.
Okay, what else?
The third was basically the opposite, high within and low between. So, stronger connections inside the default mode network, but weaker links to the attention networks.
More internally focused, maybe.
Potentially. And the last, smallest group was high within and high between. Just strong connections everywhere within and between networks.
4 distinct patterns of brain wiring in these 12-year-olds. Fascinating. Now, the big question, how did sleep link up with these patterns?
This is where it gets really compelling. They found a clear connection. Kids who consistently got shorter sleep duration, just fewer hours of sleep, were more likely to be in that low within and high between group.
Wait, the group with weaker internal connections but stronger connections to the attention networks? Less sleep time was linked to that specific pattern.
Exactly that pattern.
Wow. What about sleep quality? The efficiency measure.
That linked to a different pattern. Kids with lower sleep efficiency, more tossing and turning, less solid sleep, were more likely to fall into the high within and low between group.
The one with strong internal connections, but weaker external ones.
So how long you sleep and how well you sleep seem to map onto different brain connectivity styles, at least in this study.
That's really interesting. Did demographics play a role too? Like who got less sleep or fit these patterns?
Yeah, they did note some trends. In their sample, boys, older kids within the group, and minority children tended to get less sleep overall. And importantly, when looking ahead at behavior, boys and minority children were also more likely to show externalizing problems a year later. And they were more likely to be in that low within and high between profile group.
The same group linked to shorter sleep duration.
Yes. The pieces start to connect there.
Okay, so shorter sleep duration links to the low within, high between pattern. Lower sleep efficiency links to the high within, low between pattern. And that first pattern, the short sleep one, how did it predict behavior a year later?
This is really the core finding. That specific profile, low within and high between default mode network connectivity, was significantly linked to higher scores for externalizing problems a year later in year 3.
So the kids around age 12 with less sleep, showing this specific brain wiring signature, they were more likely to be acting out, having impulse control issues, things like that, at age 13.
That's the connection the data showed. And the researchers point out this pattern isn't totally out of the blue. Similar patterns, lower connectivity inside the default mode network. Higher connectivity between it and attention networks like the dorsal attention network have shown up in other studies. Research on things like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and also certain personality traits sometimes linked to conduct problems.
So finding it here, linked specifically to sleep duration and predicting these externalizing behaviors in a large group of adolescents adds a really important piece to the puzzle.
It really does.
What about the other kind of problems? Internalizing, like anxiety or depression. Did these brain patterns predict those too?
That's a key point. In this study, they did not find a significant link between these brain profiles and internalizing problems a year later.
So the predictive power here was specifically for the externalizing, the acting out type behaviors.
Correct. For this sample and this analysis, yeah.
Okay, that distinction is important. So let's zoom out a bit. Why is all this important? What are the bigger takeaways here?
Well, it really underlines how crucial sleep is during these formative years. It's not just about feeling tired or performing well on a test the next day.
It's more fundamental.
It seems so. Professor Asif Oshri, one of the researchers, basically said sleep is foundational for mental health, for learning how to regulate emotions.
And Linhao Zhang, the lead author, made a similar point, right, about adolescence being this critical window.
Yeah, that it's a key time for brain development, and if you're not getting enough quality sleep, it genuinely seems harder to build those skills for managing impulses and emotions.
So the study suggests this chain. Sleep habits influence brain wiring patterns, and those patterns then influence the risk for certain behavioral outcomes.
Exactly. It highlights that both how long you sleep and how well you sleep matter, though they might affect brain connectivity in slightly different ways, leading to potentially different outcomes or risks.
And that specific pattern, linked to shorter sleep, weaker internal network, stronger attention network, links what might be going on there, is the brain compensating.
That's a really plausible idea the authors raise. Usually, your internal default mode network and your external attention networks have this kind of push-pull relationship. When one's up, the other's down.
So you can shift focus easily.
Right. But maybe not getting enough sleep messes with that balance. That increased connection between the default mode network and the dorsal attention network in the short sleepers could be the brain kind of struggling to switch off from the outside world, even at rest.
Or maybe having to work harder to stay focused when awake because it's tired?
That's another possibility. Like the brain is constantly trying to compensate, maybe staying in a state of heightened, almost effortful attention because it hasn't had enough restorative rest.
Wow. So the tired brain struggle might actually be visible in these connectivity patterns.
That seems to be the implication. And it suggests something important.
Which is?
That maybe interventions focused on improving sleep in adolescence could do more than just make them feel better day to day. It might actually help steer brain development onto a healthier track.
Potentially preventing some of these later behavior problems.
Potentially, yes. And knowing these patterns, maybe you could even target interventions towards kids showing specific sleep issues or connectivity profiles.
Focusing on sleep as a real preventative health measure for brain development and behavior. That's a powerful message.
It really is. But, you know, like all studies, this one has its limitations. The researchers are careful to point them out.
Always important to consider. What did they highlight?
Well, first, the Fitbits. While way better than self-report, they aren't the absolute gold standard for sleep measurement.
Which is?
That would be polysomnography, hooking kids up to sensors in a sleep lab to measure brain waves, eye movements, muscle activity. That gives you much more detail about sleep stages.
Okay, so Fitbit gives duration and efficiency, but not the deep dive into REM sleep versus deep sleep, etc.
Exactly. And those sleep stages change a lot during adolescence, so understanding how they relate to brain wiring could be a future step.
Makes sense. What else?
The timing. While they linked year 2 sleep brain data to year 3 behavior, most of that detailed sleep data was just from year 2.
So you can't definitively say poor sleep caused the brain changes which caused the behavior.
Right. It's a strong association, but cause and effect is hard to nail down without more data points over time. It could be a feedback loop or other factors involved.
The classic correlation versus causation issue.
Always. Also, they looked at average connectivity across these big networks. Digging into specific subregions within those networks might reveal even more precise links.
Like looking at specific neighborhoods within the cities, not just the whole city traffic flow.
Good analogy. And they focused on 5 main networks, including more brain networks could give an even fuller picture.
And didn't they mention something about the study sites?
Yeah, just that the data came from multiple places across the US. They accounted for site differences statistically, but acknowledged that tiny variations across sites could subtly influence things. It's just a reality of large-scale research.
Okay, so a really strong study with some fascinating findings, but still room for more research to build on it.
Absolutely. That's how science progresses.
So wrapping up this deep dive, the big takeaway seems to be this. How young teenagers sleep, especially how much sleep they get, seems tied to very specific patterns of brain connectivity.
Patterns involving how their internal default mode network communicates with itself and with external attention networks.
And one specific pattern, linked to shorter sleep, appears to predict a higher risk of developing externalizing behaviors, like acting out or impulse control issues down the road.
It gives us a potential window into the brain mechanisms linking sleep and behavior. It's not just sleep is good for you, it's how it might be shaping the developing brain.
It really makes you think differently about adolescent sleep, doesn't it? Not just as downtime, but as, well, active brain construction time.
And that simple habits like prioritizing enough good quality sleep could have really profound, long-lasting effects on that construction process.
Sleep as a vital building block for a healthy future brain.
That seems to be a key message, yes.
Definitely food for thought. Thanks for unpacking all that with me.
My pleasure. Really interesting stuff.
Thanks for tuning in to the Health Headliner podcast by To Digital. Like and subscribe for more health news and breakthroughs. Stay healthy and informed. See you next time.